This is Peter Helland with Gus Zuehlke and Christopher Kuhl, who is our guest. Chris happened to see one of the shows on the internet a long time ago, and he called up a couple months ago, said he wanted to come back to South Bend. He'd been gone a long time. And he's back, and we're three Notre Dame grads. Gus and I lived in Flanner, and you lived in Grace. And we're kind of linking up with Gus. Gus has had the big theme of pursuing peace, and the scripture is Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And we're playing on the children. We're playing on our fathers a little bit too. Okay, we're the children of our fathers, obviously, and the peacemakers are children of God. So there is a connection with understanding our fathers. I think every good father, every father likes peace. You know, he likes his home to be peaceful. And theoretically, I think if you ran your home in a godly way, the result might be peace. That would be the idea. Even though Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace, but I came to bring division. Okay, I mean, so you always see these contradictions sometimes. But we're living in a time, from my perspective, we're in the third huge event right now. The first huge event was 1776. Okay, you had real kind of a civil war there. You had households dividing. Some were loyalists, some decided with the Patriots. All throughout the 13 colonies, split right in the home. The Civil War was in a way not a civil war in the sense that it was in the home. It was you had the southern states going against the northern states. Huge division. They did not agree. The loyalists did not agree with the Patriots. The Southerners did not agree with the Northerners. But now it seems like it's even much, much worse as far as the level of disagreement. Because now we're finding, when you look at the comments and when you pick it up, you're picking up one side is saying, I want the other side dead. They should be dead. Okay? Each side is going that far. They really want the other side dead because you don't belong. The other side does not really belong to the true American experiment. You know, their vision of this nation, Trump followers is not part of their vision. And for the Trump followers, the people that are following Kamala Harris and Biden, they don't see that they're part. So now peacemaking is crucial, but it's much more difficult in my mind because the divide is like, there's no point of connection. Civil War, you can talk about, okay, but how do you read those scriptures on slavery? Or, you know, can we, you know, and they talked about it and they just couldn't come to an agreement, right? In the revolution, they just couldn't do it. But Gus, you are more the guy on the peace. Chris, you're following it. And we're bringing in our fathers. We're trying to bring in, what are we looking at right now? And how can we look at the big picture? And how can we capitalize that peacemakers are children of God? And we have an understanding of our fathers and how they did it. And did they err? I mean, are our fathers to blame that's come to this? Where were their errors? Because we've been...
Yeah, these are all good questions, Peter. These are all good questions and difficult ones. I was talking with my wife about the problem of the great divide that's occurring in the country right now. And it just seems that we need a wisdom to bridge the sides, to relationally bridge people one to another, and that people decide with their wills not to do violence to each other. So we need something like the wisdom, the public wisdom, public wisdom of a Gandhi, or the wisdom of people like Thomas Merton, the wisdom of people who actually looked at the society of great division and saw through to common humanity. I also think of John the 23rd, Saint Pope John the 23rd, who wrote that famous document, Pacem in Terris. And that's what I said to my wife when I discussed this with her. I said, you go back to what John the 23rd said. He starts out, you got to follow, he said, the order established by God. That's how he begins the discussion of peace in his famous encyclical. And the important thing about that encyclical, that Peace on Earth, he wrote it when he was dying, okay? And he got an advanced copy of it over to Khrushchev. And then he finished, and got another copy to Kennedy. And he actually secretly negotiated between the two of them right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they both based their negotiation on this yet to be promulgated encyclical. He sent a copy to Khrushchev first.
So you have, okay, let's say you have Antifa,
right,
which are anti-fascist is the name for them, but they're basically aligned with the communists, okay? Kamala Harris is more, they say that she's even further left than Bernie Sanders, okay? Who I hear got married in Moscow at the height of the Cold War. So Bernie's way out there, Kamala potentially. So you have Khrushchev, who's a communist, talking to Kennedy. So theoretically, you're saying we should be able to talk, but...
Yeah, well, no, that's the hope. I mean, and what we have to do, one of the things we could do is mine history for insight as to how we could put this together. And I've got some ideas about that, but I'd like to hear from Chris. I'm really glad you're here, Chris. I've enjoyed getting to know you. I brought some art along because you are an artist, and I have a great deal of respect for the vocation of the artist. And indeed, because art can go places, and I'll tell you about my own experience of that, that even other forms of discourse can't reach. And so what I like, I really want to thank you for your pilgrimage that has brought us here.
Yeah, on the pilgrimage to South Bend, thanks to Peter and his great hospitality. And he's an honorary member of the service, of the Corps. Let's just say I've been, my life came from growing up in a military family, and we lived in Germany. We lived on a German army base that was rebuilt, and apartments were built. These apartments might have been there before World War II. And I said, Dad, why are we living here in this base? Chris, we won the war, the Germans lost, so we're coming over here and we're living on their base so we can enforce the peace. I said, it makes sense to me. Do they mind? No, they don't mind. They're rebuilding their society, their infrastructure. It took them a long time. So growing up in the military, your frame of reference is, it's every day is a do or die day. Anything can happen at any moment where you have to get ready to go to some kind of theater of combat. Your fathers, it's men, not women. There was no women in the military. So you grew up with a sense of seriousness. Still had a great, joyful childhood. So I knew the existence of war. So I studied it as a child. I was kind of fascinated about these battles. How did we win? Who did we beat? Where did it happen? And I wanted to know, kind of like, it wasn't just like a magic bullet. We won all these battles. No, we lost, almost 1 million men. And the Russians lost, they say 20 or 5 to 20 million. Germany lost millions and millions of these young men. Everybody was being slaughtered everywhere, fighting for their country. That's what they were doing it for. They were all fighting for their homelands or countries. So I wanted to know, because I wanted to know what the heart of a righteous soldier would be. It would be to protect his country from a foreign invasion. So that's why I built my paradigm. We're allowed to go to take up arms, even though you're a Catholic, to protect your family, your hometown, your state, your country, from an occupation of some kind of evil, menacing force that's going to be coming in on you and enslaving everyone. So I said, okay, God, I don't believe people should be killed or dying, but I believe that, if that's you call people to do that, that should be a normal state of affairs. But as you get older and you see the U.S. getting involved in all these smaller wars, UN wars they call them, especially Vietnam. I think Vietnam is when I drew the line. Basically, it's like I didn't see a necessary security emphatic need that we had to lay it on the line here. We got to draft millions of boys. We got to get the ships up, the Air Force over there. We got to give them a total war, a total European. We got to hit them from the air, the navy, the sea. I said, this is a third world country. It hasn't even developed yet into a proper state where they can have their own economy. It's agrarian culture. It's a Buddhist agrarian culture. So then you see the system falling flat because they're using a system of like defending your country and your way of life, and then they're starting to try to use that as a fig leaf cover for either Vietnam, invading Dominican Republic. One day when I was 10 years old, I said to my dad, "Dad, look at the New York Times." Because I saw palm trees, but it didn't look like Vietnam, and it wasn't. It looked like Miami. I said, "What is this?" "Oh, why are our troops in Dominican Republic, Dad?" "Because we're in the middle of a Vietnam War. We're losing 200 or 300 casualties a week. We're not making, it's just like a slugfest. Like, why are we bothering to send some troops to the Dominican Republic when we need them over there?" The logic is, if you're going to win that war, put all your eggs in that basket. He goes, "Chris," he looked at me and he shrugged, and I knew that he was just kind of disgusted that I had seen through the curtain that the emperor had no clothes, that we had troops all over the place doing all kinds of operations that weren't really justifiable. So as a 10-year-old, I'm just using my logic, and they don't add up. So then, you go to Iraq in all the last 20 years. It's just a litany of nation busting. Let's call it nation busting. That bomb, they call it the Moab, the mother of all bombs. It's a bunker buster bomb. Well, starting in 2001, under Republicans, for 8 years, they destroyed Iraq, and then where else? And then when the Democrats came in for 8 years, they destroyed Libya, Syria, Somalia. Any other countries I'm leaving out here? Syria. All these wars just exponentially proliferated everywhere. And I'm thinking, like, why are we exporting all this nation busting, dropping bombs? There's no diplomacy. Diplomacy? Are you kidding me? Well, it's just the military occupation. Oh, I forgot to mention Afghanistan. So then it's 2020 now. It's Christmas, one day after Christmas. And so I'm giving you a big roundabout tour of how I went from being a proponent of the Vietnam War in 1964, because my dad had to go there. I was 180 degrees behind my dad. By the time 4 years went back and I'm in junior high, I'm 180 degrees against it, because I know that our American boys are caught in a death box in Southeast Asia. The more you put in, the more death, the more casualties. It's just an endless conveyor belt. I was 12 years old. I figured that out. This is not the U.S. against Germany or Japan. That was that time. Now they're trying to they're trying to brainwash in, to support, but the support is failing because there's too many casualties, and they look at the goal. They look at the end result. They don't really see it. They don't really see a net benefit. Net benefit, we're in World War II, we're assured of peace throughout the world. The whole world's going to have peace. This is like, and so that the whole world could develop. 1945, the UN, trade. We go back to the things that we do, to develop the country. So we're in a perpetual state of war around the world. So that's why I'll just, I'm not going to make a final judgment on that. I'm going to say that I think what bothers me most is both parties, they're all like one party, Democrat, Republican. There's no peace. The only peace activists I know is Code Pink and certain individuals that stand alone, maybe, like yourself, all of us, we're peace activists. We don't want to see conflict, wars in developing countries. They create millions of refugees that have to be housed and fed continuously, 24/7. They got to have a roof. They got to have electricity. They got to have rice, tea, meals, 3 meals a day. They got to do laundry. They have to have schools built, like in Syria, on the Turkish border. So all these things are just piling and piling upon degradations and sufferings upon these people in Syria, Libya. And I misspoke when I didn't mention Yemen. And I could bring in the Gaza Strip because they're under military occupation since I was 10 years old. That's a long time, 67. So these zones are under occupation. They're under attack. They're under bombings, especially Yemen from the UAE, Saudi Arabian, indiscriminate bombing, schools blown up, mosques blown up, wedding parties. There's disease. It's winter there. There's no food. This is like World War II in these places. It's like the end of the war. Because people don't realize, my last point, I'll be brief.
Yep.
The biggest death rate in World War II was at the end of the war. December, January, 44, 45. May is when Germany surrendered. In August is with Japan. More people died from January through August 45 than had died up to that point, because there was a cumulative wave of death that swept over Europe. You had no food, no fuel, no doctors, no medicines, no nurses. You had millions of soldiers wounded, dying, millions of Russians, Germans, all sorts of casualties all over the place. Constant bombing, constant threat of death. Civilians paid the biggest price. And then you talk about 2 nuclear bombs in Japan when they weren't even needed, because I think General MacArthur, General Eisenhower, and the head of the Strategic Air Command, he said, don't drop the nuclear bomb. Japan's top cities are already firebombed. They have no food, they have no fuel, and they're entirely encircled by the U.S. Navy, submarines, cruisers. So they're going to give up sooner or later. You don't really need to drop. You're just going to be bouncing rubble upon rubble. Okay, if you want to watch that happen, go ahead, spend $1 billion to, move rubble around. So that's where I come from. I think war is the Satan's game. He loves to blow, destroy, kill, maim, injure, traumatize. The four horses of the apocalypse. That's Satan. He's riding in. He's riding in with war, death, starvation, pestilence, and death. I mean, you go down that. That's all. If you're backing that program, you're sowing that around the world, and you have no moral compass to guide you. So,
Well,
if you get me.
at Notre Dame, this is discussed. Okay, you had Stanley Hauerwas
Right.
your freshman
I studied
year.
under Professor Hauerwas at Notre Dame. Yeah.
Right, and as far as our fathers, your dad was, what was his rank? Well, he was a lieutenant?
Lieutenant commander.
Lieutenant
And
commander.
he had a higher rank to run his ship, but but he was lieutenant commander.
Right, and he got the Bronze Star
He got
for
the Bronze
action.
Star Medal for valor during the Battle of Saipan, because he got because he got the Marines something they needed, and he disobeyed orders to go in before the invasion to deliver it to the Marines.
What was it?
It was something they needed to keep them alive. It was whatever it was.
Food, ammo, malaria pills? Water, because I heard they didn't have any water.
The Marines are the ones who recommended him for the Bronze Star Medal after the battle.
It says it all there.
Okay, so he did what he thought he should do. His commanding officer broke radio silence to call him an SOB from the other ship. He saw him going in, and he said, "What's this guy doing?" But my father had a lot of shallow water boating experience in Wisconsin. Sailing in Lake Winnebago, which is a very shallow lake. It's an inland lake there near Appleton, and so he had the confidence to do it. He succeeded, and he got the medal. So we have a letter there in records from James Forrestal, who was the person,
Secretary of the Navy, right?
right,
Admiral.
Secretary of the Navy.
He was an admiral before that. He was in
Yeah.
World War II in the Pacific.
So Forrestal wrote his commendation. And there's a funny story about my father. My dad's dad, my grandfather, did not want him going to the war. He had gotten him a job where he could have been deferred at the shipyards in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, where they built the submarines, and so on. My dad just decided to go. He and basically followed his friends into the war. All his friends at Notre Dame had gone into the war, the ones who could.
Well, same as they graduated the same
Your
year.
dad graduated the same year as my dad.
So my dad went right into the Navy pilot, becoming a Navy pilot, and his brother had.
Right, and his brother died, right?
His brother was 4 years older. He had been in that same program, and he was training, and he only had a couple hours left. I think it's like 1,000 hours, and a couple hours left, a month before Pearl Harbor, and he'd fly like one day and be a gunner, the next, and so the guy that was flying crashed. Okay, so he died, and some of the books I've read for Notre Dame act like he was like one of the first casualties, in a way. Okay, but then my dad did the same thing. It was very dangerous. You know how it is.
It was dangerous for training back then. I read about Hawaii. Fourth squadron would take off. Sometimes two planes would come back, and they'd go back looking for him, and then 3 more would get lost.
In training?
Yeah, just training, flying out like 100 miles around Hawaii. It was just ditch. Nobody didn't have radio or contact that far. It was like they were losing people, pilots, like all the time. So it was almost, I think, more dangerous in training sometimes than in combat.
My dad, he didn't mention that so much. He mentioned that one time he almost missed the carrier.
Yeah.
So you're coming from a long way away. You're training, and those Corsairs. But my dad was lieutenant.
He flew the Corsair.
Yeah, yeah. But your dad,
the Duck,
was
B-17 pilot. Yeah,
a colonel.
Yeah, retired as colonel.
Okay, but he was a pilot, and you said they had 10 on the plane.
Yeah, crew of 10. A total of 10, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he went over there a little later, like 44. I still have his flight logs. And it was pretty bad over there, but a year before, it'd have been really bad. I think they lost half, they made 12,000 B-17s and about 5,000 got shot down. So the odds were, it's rough. So he survived. He had his St. Christopher medal. He made it. Had a few milk runs. Those are easy flights where you just go drop the milk, come back. But you're not going to get hurt on a milk run.
But what's interesting is we were raised by father. My dad didn't see combat because they had, it was right before the surrender of Japan, But we're all raised under fathers that were really into that war. And
yeah, they were part of it. Even people that trained and got ready to go and then they dropped the nuclear bomb, some of them probably felt let down that they didn't help the cause, But the generals would say, you could stay in if you want or leave, but it's almost like it's good, it's over. It's over, thank God it's over. You did your part, everybody did their part.
But now we've been living.
There was a limitation to it. There was, it was still fought, they still had to have communications with the leadership in Germany, the leadership in Tokyo. They still had to make plans like, you're going to give up, and these are what the plans are going to be. We're going to occupy, and you're going to rebuild your cities and your government. We're going to help you. So you have people talking, because while the war is ending up, everybody on especially our side is like, we want this to wrap up. We want it to be over. We don't want as many. We want to get on with the peacemaking process, and then what we have now, we just have this endless, it's like there's these drones that fly around. They're real planes. They're just looking for places to bomb. It's just indiscriminate, like Israel killing Soleimani, the guy. It's just like Obama's drone killings, or when Soleimani got blown up in January of this year by a drone coming to meet the Iraq government officials, military, which is, he's a member of the Iran military, and he's meeting with compatriots over here. That's pretty much of a neutral situation when you go across border to meet with military people of either side. Usually that's kind of called neutral, which means it's off limits. So anybody that would take out something like that, I call them basically, that's called a first strike starting a war, or it's kind of cowardly, because, I just to me it's repulsive to kill.
But the people that
It's just endless, though. It's like this goes on everywhere. So Libya, Yemen, Syria. What else? Somalia. It's just continuous.
But the people that win the war, especially World War II, they write the history.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a view of World War II that's never taught. I've never heard it taught. It's not in the textbooks, but it's the most obvious thing about World War II. And I'm talking about Stalin succeeding in diverting Japan from attacking him. So your insight on that?
I have a little new intel on that. Japan did go to war, tested them in 39.
38 and 39.
Yeah,
and they lost about 16,000.
Yeah, they had these battles, set pieces in Central Asia, in Mongolia, and so they kind of got beat up by Russia, and so they signed treaties in 30, and they signed another non-aggression treaty in 39 or 40, but so that gave Stalin assurances that Japan would turn south, attack Britain colonies, French colonies in America.
But it didn't matter because Germany had a peace treaty with Stalin,
but they
still invaded.
They still decided it probably wasn't worth it at that point. They tried to. All they do is they just fought over a border of 20 kilometers. And they fought for like maybe 2 or 3 weeks to a month, and then they finally just said this isn't getting either one, so they all withdrew.
So they never did, but Stalin was afraid that could happen.
At that time, Stalin was a strategic genius of World War II because he's the last man standing, and he had to deal with a lot of different moving pieces. He seemed to be probably the best tactician of the war.
So do you think
because England, Churchill was just like a big dreamer. He had all these opium dreams, like from World War II, left over of Gallipoli, losing there. And then he thought England was an empire that was coming to an end. They were after World War II, they were bankrupt. And so without American help, England is just done. And they were done after World War II. They had no money left. So they had to use every bit of money they had to just, maintain.
But like you're saying.
So they were never going to be world leaders again, except in conjunction with America. Stalin knew that. Stalin knew that England's empire was crumbling, that after World War II, all these countries would become independent. The tide of history is just sweeping over them. England is kind of like, a small power.
But you're familiar
although they
with,
have nuclear weapons.
After World War II, and this name of the show is Israel. After World War II, you had the creation of Israel in 1948. And you could argue, let's say with George Bush Jr. given the go-ahead to invade Iraq, okay? Well, a lot of people have the impression he did it because Israel wanted him to, and he was feeling that, but because was it in our interest to invade Iraq? I mean, so where are we coming from in the Middle East, and how do we? I
look upon it as from 1980, 70s, when Reagan was in power, we needed an enemy because the Russian enemy was about to make a deal with us in 1990. So we saw that winding down. Afghanistan was going to be over, and then Russia would. So they were looking to, basically, I think, the neocons decided to destroy all secular Arab governments across the belt of the Middle East. Because if you look at their flags are similar. Syria and Iraq, Jordan, I don't know all the countries, but their flags are the same red colors, but they have a different insignia in the middle. That was to show that the Pan-Arab Brotherhood, they call the Ba'ath Party, which means Renaissance Party. It's a Renaissance Party. It's directly translated into the word Renaissance. So they're rebirthing their identity as Arab peoples. Okay, this is the beginning of civilization here. Well, we're creating secular, non-theocratic governments that are going to educate their people, feed their people, defend their people, and have brotherhood with fellow Arabs. Because they have Israel there who has nuclear weapons, and so they have to band together as brothers because they're outgunned. So basically they built their militaries as kind of to bluff Israel. Just leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. Don't bother us, we won't bother you. We're Iraq, we have a big army. And then Israel knows that they can't fight these armies. They have like a 1 million man army. or I don't know how big it is, but they know that eventually they couldn't do that, so they'd have to have somebody else fighting for them, for their triumphal cause, I guess, of expansion into the Middle East. A Lebanese Palestinian said they had she knew more than I did. She says it's this greater vision of the Middle East where they control from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates River because it's in the Old Testament or something. So that's their dream. They want all that. Okay.
Greater Israel.
I think that's a little bit, I think that's, it's an immoral to want to take over and occupy and destroy these people just because you want to have a greed for their land.
Well, we had a guess.
So the program is destroy secular Arab governments. Secular Arab governments are very stable. Domestically, they're stable. They don't have any terrorism in them. There's no terrorism in a secular government. You can walk the streets and you're protected. All foreigners are protected. Foreigners come in to develop their economy. Libya, Syria, Saudi Arabia, they stay in their own places and they develop the country. And they're paid very well. There's no terrorism in those countries. The government has surveillance everywhere. It's the safest countries you'll ever go to. So what they did is I guess they got orders to get rid of all these countries and destroy them. And what they want to put back in place is instead of one Iraq, I guess they want 3 or 4. They want the Kurds in the north, which are the hill, and they want the Sunnis and the Shiites, and you know what I mean. They're redesigning what do you call it? A color revolution where they almost like communism, where they drop a hand grenade in it, blow it up, or take a box. This is better. With all the Iraqis in it, shake it up, shake it up, shake it up. Throw it on the floor, open it up. What do we have? We have chaos. Great. We can manage chaos. They went there, they go to Syria. Shake it up, blow it up. Let's divide it up. They want to divide all those countries, subdivide them into like maybe 10 districts where they can have influence in them. They never want the country to go back to its power.
Let me ask you this.
Its profile.
Years ago, Joe Bach, who taught
it's kind of the same with communism. Destroy
years ago
and then rebuild.
Years ago, Joe Bach taught at Notre Dame, and he's running for congressman against Jackie Walorski. And he came on the show one time, and he was expert in the Middle East. And then his wife went with us on the peace retreat, right, up to Green Bay. Mm-hmm. So you had an approach toward peace that Jackie Walorski had that was different than his. Can you explain? What did we learn from that peace conference? What did we learn?
Well, is this the one here?
No, this came after the peace conference in Green Bay.
Yeah, let's back up and first of all, let's talk about what Joe Bach said to you about how you might work peace in these situations.
Can I even go back further? Because I wanted to interject. You said we have to have another enemy. Now what I'm interested in.
Ever-present enemy.
Gus goes all the way back, and see that's why I like to get the feel.
Because it's a fear. You keep the people in fear and traumatized. You have to have an enemy. It's the Native Americans.
But also, isn't there an element that the military
terrorists or the communists?
The military-industrial complex benefits.
Yeah.
Okay, and Gus actually knew Senator Gerald Nye, who was senator in North Dakota, but knew your dad. He grew up near Appleton, Wisconsin.
He knew my grandfather. Right. They were.
And then he moved to North Dakota.
Yes.
Became senator there. Okay.
But
what year are we talking about for the viewers?
He was that. Here was World War I. World War I traumatized people, and by the time 1936 came, Congress actually was so traumatized by that war, they set up a committee. This is like mind blowing. Mm-hmm. They set up a committee to inquire. Why did we even go into the war? Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
And that was Gerald Nye's committee. And Gerald Nye worked that committee. And the reason he could run it is there were no munitions or defense factories in his state, in North Dakota. So
he's
untouchable. So
he'd be unbiased.
Yeah,
everybody is
hands off.
Right. He didn't have a dog in the fight, so to speak.
In the 30s,
I want to hear. Let him explain
America didn't want to go back to war in Europe. America loved its peace, even though it's going through depression. And that was a big theme about not going back. America boys fighting, it was European wars. Now you could call it Israel's wars. But after that, it was the European wars. Now Americans are fighting against Muslims. And why are we fighting Muslims? Because of 9/11, I guess? That it gets into a deep, slippery slope.
I mean, you don't let me ever tell my story.
Hey, tell your story.
Go ahead.
I mean, I've been interrupted twice now.
Okay, go ahead.
By both of you. So I forgive you both. Because I have to.
That goes for peace.
Yeah. There's no peace without reconciliation and forgiveness.
Amen.
So what we have is Senator Nye in the 30s with this committee hearing. And the committee was basically setting up to show how the munitions industries and the banks, the international banks, or the big banks, the ones in New York, were tied together pushing for World War I.
But they didn't know when they started the committee, they didn't know where they were going to go for first. Their assignment was
To figure it out, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, to look for it. And those committee hearings seemed to end fairly abruptly. And then Nye went in the direction of the America First movement. Mm-hmm. And the America First movement, he was the great senator, the great person from Congress defending the America First movement.
partly because he knew that we went into World War I not for the best of reasons.
Right. And then my father would describe going to hear him. He said he was an amazing orator and all that. And then I visited him in 1971, my first trip to Washington, D.C.
He was still there?
He was there in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Oh. And my dad just said, "Hey, let's go drive over to see the Nyes." It was like, oh, the Nyes, really? And then my dad told me some of the history. We went in. He was in bed, basically bedridden. He was completely alert, and he was joking with us. He said that he would get up every morning, and his wife would bring him the paper, and he would check the paper for the obituaries to make sure he hadn't died. That was what he was joking about. And but then he said to his wife, "Take young Gus down and show him the cartoons." They had political cartoons
that he had all over the wall.
All over the wall in the basement of his house. And I was so impressed with it. I went back and visited his widow in 1981 with a group of friends. We were traveling. We went to Washington, D.C., and then we continued on down to Florida. But in Washington, D.C., I said, let's go to Chevy Chase and visit Senator Nye's widow. So we did, and I took my friends down in that basement and showed them the cartoons 10 years later. So the Nyes were close to my grandfather and my father. And the thing is that it was kind of like the America First movement ended very abruptly, as we know.
What year?
Well, 1941 at the end. Yeah, at Pearl Harbor.
Lindbergh gave that speech in Des Moines,
September of 1941. Lindbergh gave that famous speech. And by December 7th of 41, their political position, there was nothing left of it.
Well, you know that speech. That's a famous speech. And he was saying there's three he's predicting Pearl Harbor, basically, because he was very tuned in to where these things were going. And he said there's three groups of people that are trying to get us into this war. Mm-hmm. And he didn't agree with any of them, of course. He said the British are trying to get us into this war. Mm-hmm. He said Roosevelt is trying to get in this war, and he said the Jews are trying to get us in the
Stalin.
war. But here's the thing: this thing was getting real intense, and so he had the best people screen his speeches, and so he thought that he could say that, and he found out that when he said the Jews are trying to get us into the war, apparently that's what did him in, and he went from like somebody that could have beat Roosevelt in an election. He was
going to run for president, maybe.
Well, he could have. But he was real popular.
My dad, he was a hero to my dad.
He was real popular, and then his popularity went, because the media went after him like crazy. And he,
Just like they criticized General Grant when he made a federal restriction on Jews of all kinds are not allowed in the areas of theaters of war in the South.
in the Civil War.
Yeah, Lincoln didn't like it, but pretty much stayed in effect. He said all I was talking about was the business people that were down there. They're in my way and then causing problems.
Yeah,
He didn't say not everybody.
Well, it just shows you that things can get real intense. And so whenever you're saying something, even though his speeches were cleared, boom, something can, right? And I think we're in the same situation. Things are getting real.
I recommend, like World War I we're talking about, is people watch James Corbett's 3-part series on that, because there's a lot of things that lead way before the war, almost 15 years. They worked to build that war. Because you always wonder, if you see images of Europe in 1914, oh, they got steam rail, they got rail everywhere. They're shipping, the world is rich and they're trading. It's like a renaissance again. And then they're going to slaughter each other over there in France. And then you look toward Germany in 1930s, same thing, they've rebuilt. Everything's at another high fever pit. And then we're going to be slaughtering each other. So you're wondering, why does this keep coming,
Gus, tell me
happening?
how you understand that.
I interpret that situation there's like a war is kind of like a fever. This is a theologian at Notre Dame looking at Africa, looking at the war zone in northern Uganda, which I'm very familiar with because I've done church work there in northern Uganda. And he said that war comes to these areas like a fever dream. I really like that image because what's going on is it's sort of like, it's so, when you're feverish and you have like dreams that are different than when you're not feverish, that's sort of, war is like that. It's people get into a kind of corporate fever dream, and there's always some factions, like James Corbett points out, that trigger this. And so what we want to do is we want to build up groups of people to counteract the fever. Well, I mean, that's what, and they have to be nonpartisan. They have to be, I mean, like Nye, he didn't have any armaments interests connected to his state. So he was in a position to speak for peace in a certain way. Okay?
But they didn't listen to him, and your dad didn't listen to him. In other words, your grandfather was trying to tell your dad, don't fall for the trick. Your grandfather knew what Lindbergh knew, that this was a setup.
Okay, so and indeed, so I found that out. And I found it out, it was a book you had lent me. And this is now, it's late in 2001, I believe. Maybe it was, anyway, it's a book by Robert Stinnett. It's called Day of Deceit. Mm-hmm. And what it is, it shows how Pearl Harbor was a setup, okay? And I was just reading it as a historical book. I mean, you gave it to me, and because you had a relative that did a lot of research on it, because one of your other relatives was
my mom's side, I had an uncle who was a captain of a ship at Pearl Harbor.
Right.
And then I had a cousin
who did the research
in 1965, wrote a paper about his uncle. He wanted to do the research, and he discovered Roosevelt had set that up.
Okay, so the thing is, Stinnett did the authoritative history on it in a way. He was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation to do that history. So, I mean, he was a real historian, a real good military historian. And I read the book, and I was just talking with my dad at the restaurant about it.
The Rockefellers wanted that war, so now they're funding a book to find out the truth of the war.
Well, sometimes you might.
That's sort of what happens sometimes. I mean, you never know.
Maybe their children, other generations.
Well, and you never know sometimes. That's the beauty of what should be a kind of academic freedom that should occur. That you should be able to fund research that questions the official narrative. And one of the
Sometimes it happens.
and sometimes it happens, and certainly it happened in Stinnett's case. So anyway, he writes this book, and I read it, and because Peter gives it to me, Peter would give me and does give me interesting books to read, and I read them. Okay, so in this case, I'm talking with my father and mother, and my father gets very angry, and he yells at me at the restaurant. I go,
I mean, what did you say particularly?
I just said I read this book, and the book said that Pearl Harbor doesn't fall according to the official story. I mean, and it's a very convincing book. And my father he got furious. And he yells at me. Everyone in the restaurant
could
hears
get
it.
really strong.
My dad could come back really strong. He was a Navy captain. He was a hero. He ran a bank and a bank corporation after that. My father was a leader. And so he just shouted back at me, and I felt very bad. And he said, "Oh, what are you reading, that stupid book? But don't mention that stupid book. Roosevelt wouldn't have done that." You know, that kind of thing. It was that kind of comeback. And okay. So in those days, my father would never want anyone to walk with him when he walked, because he walked slowly. And so my mother and I walked to the car ahead of him, as was the custom, and waiting for him. And I said to Mom, I feel really bad. I didn't want to disturb Dad. I didn't want him to get angry. It's not like I don't go out to dinner to debate things with my father. We go out to have a good time together.
But you did, though. Something made you do it.
Well, I could argue that Peter made me do it, but
No, come on.
No
excuses.
I'm kidding, of course.
No excuses. Why did you do it?
Why did I do it? Because I was interested in the topic. It was common in our family to bring up things we had read, things that of historical interest. That was de rigueur. That's how we did it.
Mom took him to hear Black Panthers speak.
My mom took me to hear Black Panthers or the Chicago 7.
Our dinner table was full of politics as we got older, and we could contribute. It took time to contribute because you have to learn and read books. But my grandfather Joe Foley was a lawyer, very political, Catholic, Holy Cross law student, grad. His brother, George's brother became his son, Bishop. So we're strong Irish Catholic, but very intellectual, hardworking. He worked like the devil, eh? So anyway, but no, there's free discussion. It's just like, what do you call it? You're a freebooter. You can say what you want, but you got to back it up. You got to back it up.
Right.
But then you realize if you didn't have the evidence, you really, you don't go out on a lake until you can back it up, and learn before you speak.
Right. Now here, I want to have Gus
speak.
finish this before the time runs out.
Okay, so before the time runs out. So what happened is I'm talking with my mother in the car, and I say, "Mom, I'm really sorry," and Mom smiles at me and says, "Oh, Gus, don't worry about it." She's smiling at me, and I said, "What? Don't worry." She said, your dad felt the same way about the way your grandfather said those things too. And your dad didn't like that either. I said, huh? Oh, she reminded me, yeah, you remember your dad got that war deferment job at the shipyards with Uncle Art in Manitowoc, and he could have sat out the whole war, and he chose not to.
In other words, your grandfather
right.
already kind of knew what Stinnes was writing.
Right. I think he did.
Intuitively. He knew it was a setup.
Okay, so the thing is that now fast forward, if you don't mind, to about 8 years later. This is now September or late August of 2009. My dad's caregiver went to Pearl Harbor with her boyfriend. And they see the Pearl Harbor, and she comes back, and she's talking about the USS Arizona Memorial and all that. And my dad's sitting there at breakfast. He's just me and him. And he leans over.
And he's going to die.
He died on October 5th of 2009. So
this was right before.
This was a month or so before he died.
Right.
So I'm up there looking after him. I'm looking after Mom and him, and Mom had dementia. And he was in his last months. And I was blessed. My boss allowed me to go up and to care for my parents. It was wonderful that he allowed that. But what I wanted to say is that, so my dad is listening, and he says to me, real quiet, because when he would get serious, he would get real quiet. And he said, we kind of pulled Japan into that, didn't we? And I was even quieter. I said, yes, Dad. It seems the best historians say so. Yes, Dad. And that was it. What I saw happening there is that God was healing my father. God was at work, gradually and gently bringing my dad the truth. And of course, I've told this story to people because I believe we need to be healed as a country, as a world, especially the Western world, of the lies that pull us into violence and war. And you saw it happening with my dad. It was almost like he was kept alive by God. All that time, he was 87 years old, to get to the point where he could renounce in his heart, privately at that point, but I was there as a witness. And of course, after he died, we did a number of things. We did the peace conference in Green Bay that Peter mentioned. And then in 2016, during the Year of Mercy, we went to the West Bank and Palestine and did a peace conference with Israelis and Palestinians together. And I presented this statue, which was, and I brought it along because we're in the presence of an artist. And I appreciate that. But the thing is that this statue is a Pietà statue with two people who have died. The young man who represents the Palestinians, and then the older man representing the Israelis. And Mary's holding on to both of them. Mm-hmm. And I christened the statue Mater Misericordiae, which means Mother of Mercy. But if you parse the word misericordiae, you end up miserable heart. Mm-hmm. Okay? So she's the mother who gathers both sides in her miserable heart. And what was interesting, the original statue was white, the one I carried over to Palestine in 2016. I had the sculptor from Mishawaka cast another statue that's darker here. And it was sitting in my office, and I noticed something that I didn't notice on the white statue. What I noticed is that above Mary's breast here is a lamb right on the head of the Israeli soldier, like the lamb is there. And then the Palestinians' boy's chest that's opened up here, he's bare-chested in this thing. It looks like a cradle. So Mary has the Lamb of God and the cradle. And I noticed it. And I called the artist, and I brought him over back to my office. He had not planned that. So this became kind of a remarkable statue that knew more than it could tell. That it came right out of his soul, the artist's soul. And then I presented it to the Palestinians, and I told the story of Mikko Peled and his sister. His sister's daughter was killed by Palestinian suicide bombers in a Jerusalem mall in the 90s. And Mikko, his sister, Mikko became a peace activist like his dad. He didn't start out as a peace activist, but he became one. And I was there with Mikko, and I reminded everybody in the West Bank with the statue, holding onto the statue. I reminded everybody what Nurit Peled said. after her daughter was killed by 2 Palestinian suicide bombers. They wanted to use her daughter's story to take revenge. And she looked at the Israelis that wanted to take revenge, and she said, "Don't anyone speak to me of revenge." She said, "No mother would want any other mother to suffer the way I've suffered." That's what she said. And I held this statue up, giving it to the Palestinian village of Nabi Saleh, and reminded them of what this heroic Israeli had said. Well, if Nurit Palad can do it, so can we, Americans. We can let go of our anger and our violence and our dehumanization of our opponents like she did. And Catholics, Mary's right there in that equation. So that's why art is important too, because art goes much further sometimes than our words can.
That was a powerful story. That's a beautiful story. I would just say at this Christmas, we're a day after Christmas, your powerful story is very affecting me, and we basically, the problems we're seeing in America really arise out of thin air compared to these other problems in certain regions between religions and stuff. So I think it's a wake-up call, what you just said. America is ginning up problems where it doesn't even have them. We're one of the richest countries in the world. We have the most developed. We don't really have these problems. They're ginned up. They're brought in. It's a color revolution. So, America, wake up. Reach out to your neighbors. Reach out to your people living next to you down the street. Get to know people. Mm-hmm. Get out. Walk. Get out. Get to know. And this Christmas, I want to just, lift prayers up for all the unfortunate people, like in a beautiful Syrian country where there's 1 million Christians, where the original church was in that country, Syria, Libya, poor Yemen, used to be called Arab Felix, the happy Arabians. And in the West Bank, all these countries under duress, Libya. Everybody, let's pray for peace. Let's put the people in power that will bring peace. Let's have peace in our neighborhoods, in our streets, and our houses. And that's all we could ask for. Merry Christmas 2020. Peter, thanks for...
Peter,
thanks so much.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. We bring up our fathers, and we bring up, of course, the important role of the father, who obviously wants peace in his home. But if they don't know how to run their home, or they don't have the strength to run it, you may not have peace. So we have to pray for wisdom to be able to create. If you can't create peace in your own home,
in your own life,
how are you going to create peace on the bigger level? So we really have to pray for peace in our homes, because the Father...
In our hearts, everybody repent, pray, say the rosary if you're Catholic, get serious about life. Life is serious, You don't know how long we have to live. Let's live for positive values, community, education, art, music.
Right. We're wrapping it up. This is the show Israel with Gus Zuehlke and Christopher Kuhl. And so till next time.